Fine.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward, but yeah, just a uh, a developer's journey, like I said here, and this is intended to be um, one of the first of a series of talks. So the saga of state management. Here we go. So obligatory intro slide. This is what I used to look like. For those of you who don't know me, I born and raised in the South Side of Chicago, city boy turned suburbanite. I'm a jazz enthusiast and an amateur chess player. Um, and went to Northern Illinois University, got a degree in finance. I went to Fullstack Academy for my software training, and I love learning and teaching, and very much interested and infatuated with the financial markets. And I am married to a beautiful wife, and I have 2 children. Now on to the state management. So no state management talk will be a state management talk without first talking about Redux. And again, this is a developer's journey. So this is the first state management tool that I was really introduced to and worked with when I initially started my software career. And here's just a plain reducer, right? We have a typical reducer with a switch case, and for this reducer is simple enough where we could probably get away with just writing a ternary operator here, but more or less this is what reducers look like, right? And then here at the bottom we have a couple of action creators, and the idea here is just to demonstrate like this is the typical Redux setup when we're using plain Redux. And you know I, I don't think I need to belabor the point here that again, this is just a simple Boolean value that we're tracking. And a lot of people, I'm sure, already know the pain points of Redux, and it's just a lot of boilerplate, right? And so that's the TLDR of it. And like I said, it's well known, and this is the primary reason why a lot of folks have started to move away from Redux. And so the next solution, React hooks, of course. And back in 2019 is when React hooks hit the scene. And for a lot of people, they kind of felt like it was a paradigm shift. And so this is, where people began to start to really explore, really embracing functional React and moving away from class-based components and really rethinking the way that they architect their apps, which forced people to rethink the way that state management was handled. And when we got into React hooks, there was a couple different ways outside of Redux that were suggested. And the primary hook for that is use context, of course. So this will be the primary hook that we'll focus on since we're talking about state management, because this is what we would reach for when we're talking about creating some shared state and using that throughout the app. So with this, we have a setup similar to this, right? We create some context that has some initial state, and we might get that state from some hook that's being used to manage that state, and then we will pass that down into a provider, and the components within that provider would be able to connect to the context like this, And so we would import that same context into a component, and we would have the use context hook that will take that context. And then when that hook is ran, we get the shared state back. And then we use the shared state, we compose the view using that shared state. And so if we go back, you see we have two components here. So that was the sample setup for component 1. And then for component 2, this component is not necessarily concerned about the entire shared state, it just wants a piece of it. And so we'll go ahead and destructure the value that we care about here for this component, and go ahead and compose our view using this shared state. So fascinating, right? Everything looks good, everything's kosher, but there is a problem with this, and there's performance. So let's take a look at the React docs. So any component calling use context will always re-render when the context value changes. If re-rendering the component is expensive, you can optimize it by using memoization. So I think a lot of people, like I said, when hooks were first introduced and people started to re-architect their apps, they might have ran into this where, like here, this component is only interested in one piece of that shared state, but because of this use context here, we are forced to re-render even though we are only concerned about one piece of the shared state, right? And so, again, referring to the docs and understanding how the use context hook works, that kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. And if you go to some of the GitHub issues, you'll find here this user actually filed a bug shortly after hooks were introduced to the community, and you know, the main thing that he points out is, hey, I need to re-render a component only if global state contains next props.value. So in other words, going back to that sample setup that I had where you have a component that's only interested in a particular piece of the state, you know, that's the only time you want it to re-render, when that state is updated. And Dan Abramov promptly replied, and the thing that is of note here is, hey, this is working as designed. And so this is where I think a lot of people may have experienced a little bit of a frustration when first working with hooks because of, you know, these performance issues. But they offer 3 different options. We're only going to look at the first option, and it's the preferred option, as Dan points out. And so here, what he says is, hey, let's just split out the context. So you have 2 contexts now. And for this particular example, they're talking about app context and theme context. And, you know, again, this is the preferred fix. So if we go back to our sample setup and we refactor, now we have 2 contexts, and now we might have 2 different hooks that manage the state for each of those contexts. And then you get this, you start to get this cluster of providers, and you know, this is the, again, the preferred solution to separate out these different values so that you don't get these unnecessary renders. And then you have the component 2, where it's only concerned about the is logged in value. And now it'll only re-render when the is logged in value from this particular context is updated. And then you can have the shared context from the other, for the other component, it'll update accordingly. Problem solved, right? Not quite. So the issue is when we get to a app like this, creating multiple contexts becomes less than ideal. It's you know, essentially in short, the developer experience goes down at scale, because now we run into not only performance issues with multiple unnecessary renders, but there's additional boilerplate because we want to separate out our context, right? And so, you know, what do we do? Who can help us out here? Don't fear, ApolloClient v3 is here. And I don't know if you all will recognize this, but this is, I thought this was kind of funny to add, given that Apollo is a tool created by the Meteor team. And I don't know if anybody recognizes this person from the 90s, but ApolloClient v3, reactive variables, state containers integrated into ApolloClient's reactive model. So the utility that we're going to concern ourselves with here is the make var, which comes from the ApolloClient library. And here's the example from the website. So if you want to create a reactive variable, you just set up this make var and you pass in the initial state, very much like you would do with the context from the React context. And so here they have a sample cart items variable, and it initializes it with the empty array. And then the note down here, the return value is a function. And so what happens is you can actually read the value just by invoking it without passing in any arguments. And if you want to pass in an argument, then that's how you would modify the value. And then you, for your components that care about the state of this value, they would use this hook, use reactive var. And so this is a cart component that would use this reactive var and pass in this cart items var. And then you get the cart items, and this component is going to re-render every time there's an update just to the cart items. And then you would compose your view with the cart items. So with that in mind, we go from this with the React Context API to something like this. And my thought is that here you probably have, you set up your reactive variables maybe in some data layer module, and then this would be like your base app component. And you can see how much less boilerplate there is with this. You know, there's no additional context providers or anything like that, or any additional hooks to concern ourselves with the state. Very clean and lean. And so then we have our first component, which would grab the variable from whatever data layer module is set up. And then when you pass that into the use reactive var hook, this component is only going to re-render whenever updates to this particular reactive variable happens. And then likewise for component 2, you'll have the is logged in variable. And because this component simply just cares about whether or not the state of the app is the user is logged in, it's only going to re-render when this variable updates. And it's very simple and concise, no additional boilerplate, and no worries about additional re-renders. And so it's so simple that that's it. That's the end of the episode 1. So and of course these can be used with apps that don't even use GraphQL. But the next episode we'll get into the in-memory cache and how these reactive variables become super powerful, utilizing the in-memory cache from the ApolloClient library. So with that, stay tuned for the next episode. Any questions, comments?
I think that might be in the future what you're going to discuss, but my question was going to be around, does it save the variables alongside the Apollo cache with your other queries and data?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way that I understand it, and I think the docs even mentioned, these tools for reading and maintaining and updating the reactive variables, they're actually separate from the cache. And so the cool thing is, if I get the opportunity to share in the next talk, is the in-memory cache to me is more like your data store. And you can kind of manage data as it's coming in from the various GraphQL endpoints. And then as you get the data in the shape that you are satisfied with, you can dispatch the updates to that reactive variable, because these reactive variables can be used anywhere throughout the application. Any other takers?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess simple enough. Thanks, Brett. I'll turn it back over to Bill.